Right. A long time. But he was in charge of water lilies plus a lot of other things. And he doesn't want me to do a long talk, so I'm going to just say this is Pat Nutt, and he'll take it from there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I must thank the Gardens for inviting me down, and especially Susan for wonderful hospitality for the last day or so. Believe it or not, when I left Philadelphia yesterday morning at 5 a.m., I shoveled ice and snow and sorted the driveways, and it's unbelievable, but my hands were really chapped when I arrived yesterday, but with your, must be the sulfur in the water and the soft water here and some ointment, I'm in much better shape than I was 24 hours ago. There's an incredible coincidence here, because the last time I was in this area was January 1956. And I'm ashamed to admit that although we stopped here, we didn't explore the whole gardens. We were on our way to Miami, and that was a long time ago, but I should have really looked into what McKee, was comprised of in those days. There's another incredible coincidence. Apparently, Mr. McKee employed a David Fairburn here from Missouri Botanical Gardens, and I inherited a lot of his carnivorous plants when Missouri was in the throes. If any of you have been there, the climatron was built in 1958, and all the energies went into the climatron, and some of the collections suffered somewhat. And as Mr. Pring, who I studied under, was Dr. Seibert's father-in-law, much of that plant material came to Longwood, so it's another horticultural connection there. I brought some, most of you have got them. I can assure you I don't get any commission from Maryland Aquatics for promoting their catalogues, but Longwood and Maryland Aquatics have a very close relationship. Tim Jennings, who's now in charge of the lilies, and I give demonstrations and lectures, and Maryland Aquatics are very generous because they lend us pumps and filters and this sort of thing, which makes, for a good mutual arrangement. And their catalogue, I'm not pushing anyone to purchase from them, but it does have a lot of useful information in it. There's the 10% solution using plants as a filter, which does work, and their new floating planters, which are a great success. And I was amazed, Kelly Billing is in charge in Maryland, and I was amazed to see xerophytic plants, desert plants, growing like Gerbers in these floating planters quite successfully. So without any more ado, I'll give you a little information on how we grow lilies in the north, but also I have another good friend, Don Bryan, in Lake City, who grows very good lilies. So I do have some knowledge of growing lilies in the southern states. This is the gentleman I studied under. If you know water lilies well, you'll see his name cropping up quite frequently. It's George H. Pring. Like me, another displaced Lyme. He emigrated from Britain in the turn of the century, educated at Kew, and for many years he worked at Missouri Botanical Garden. His name crops up continually with water lilies. This shot was taken back when I was first working for him back in 1957. This is a Director T. Moore, and he's examining the flower to see if it's the correct time to gather pollen. I think without a doubt he was the top hybridizer for tropical water lilies of all time. This is the construction of the pool complex when I was hired at Longwood, and it was rather interesting because one of the conditions of employment was to study under George, and I didn't betray any emotion when it was mentioned, but I thought what a wonderful opportunity to be able to study and work under a world-famous expert. So this was our initial pool complex. This has all been demolished now, but it just shows the work that goes into the large pool, which will contain the large water platters, and the corner pools, the egg-shaped pools, and the long, narrow pools, which contained our original hardy water lily collection. Later on, there'll be some more information on how we enlarged this from a trip to England. This is Pring's very humble houses. Paula has seen the updated version of this at Missouri Botanical Garden. There is George and I working away. He was about the same age as I am right now, but as you can see, he was still active enough to work with me. And we're As you can see, urgency is always important. We haven't even resodded the walks here, but we wanted to get the water lilies planted. For us, we have a much shorter season than you down here. We have to get the water lilies planted out around May the 30th. This, believe it or not, is our original. We were looking at some wonderful Victorias in the aquarium tanks yesterday that Bill Cherry raised. This was our original Victoria Cruziana, planted on June 1, and this is how it looked on August 1. There is Mr. Preem's granddaughter, Lisa Seibert, standing, and it's not a fake picture. The only thing, we've got a thin plywood board here so that her weight is distributed evenly. And we grew much larger Victorias than this, but this is Victoria Cruziana. It's the hardiest of the two species. And this was the pool complex the first year. I'd come to Longwood at the time when the estate was passing over from a private garden to a public display garden, so I had a big challenge, and some of the older workers were sort of waiting for me to fall. They just wondered, they had a lot of expectation, and I was so pleased the first year we were able to be successful. This is Marliac's nursery. Marliac, without a doubt, was the greatest hybridizer of hardy water lilies. It's in southern France. It was purchased by a friend of ours, Ray and Barbara Davis, and they've attempted to restore it. Fortunately, some of the old original cultivars were still here, and we've been able to bring them back into the trade there and get some of the nomenclature cleaned up. This is the Royal Botanic Gardens queue. This is the palm house, and just to the right of here is a tiny little water lily house. And the lady in charge of this, Emma Fox, has been with us on the Amazon trip, so she's in charge of palms and water lilies, and she does a really good job there. We were discussing soil mixes yesterday. I got the distinct impression that your mix here contains a lot of sand. We are fortunate in Pennsylvania that we can get a loam mix here. Here we're covering with sand so that no organic matter floats in the pools and makes it unsightly. But the mix for water lilies is important, and we're doing a lot of research now on what are the best fertilizers, what are the best way to apply them. This is one of the National Trust gardens in Kent, one of the old castles that's been converted into a hardy water lily garden, which is really outstanding. Scotney Castle, very near Sissinghurst, well worth a visit if you're still in Britain. These are some of the gardens that we gained inspiration from for Longwood. This is the National Water Lily Collection in Pocklington, near the city of York, and it's an outstanding collection. The Society visited this garden in 1988, and they almost had to drag me out of the gardens to get me back on the bus, because I spotted Marliac hybrids that I hadn't ever seen before, or only seen as a boy in Britain. And Ray Davis, who was managing or maintaining this garden, told me that I could have one division of anything that I saw there. This thing, you may recognize this. This is Christopher Lloyd's wonderful garden with his octagonal lily pool here, and there's Christopher actually working with some visitors. We very politely didn't interrupt him that morning, but one of Britain's great horticulturists. This is the pond that everyone raves about, the octagonal pond, but this is called the horse pond, and I have Anthony Archer Wills's wonderful book here, and there's a picture of this pond. This was early in the year. This was Chelsea week. There isn't much flowering. There's a wonderful plate in Anthony's book of this pool in midsummer, and he's got a very nicely planted effect there with the hardy water lilies. Liners. Liners have revolutionized pool construction, and this may look a little strange to you, but there's a method in our madness, because we're leaving the liner out in strong sunlight to get nice and supple, so that when we put it into the excavation that's been made, we can eliminate most of the creases here. This is a pool complex that we put in. Longwood does a lot of demonstration work, and we had a used liner that possibly would have ended up on the trash, so we decided to do a demonstration pool this year. This is Bill Haldeman, one of my trusty ex-students who's now in charge of a private garden in Wilmington, Delaware. And this is the process of, we dug the excavation. This was a cool day, early April, you can see by the daffodils here. And we've excavated it. We did this all in one afternoon, 3 of us. So we've excavated the pool to enlarge this area. Now, Bill is in the pool. This was rather amusing because I brought a case of moosehead along, and Bill is having a cool one there. But as this cold water rose, it had an amazing effect on his bladder. And, about every 20 minutes he had to dash off and find a big tree. But later on we've got the pool just about filled up to his waistline there. Just about finishing. We've got some nice driftwood stumps and rocks around. So this is April. Now this is July. Really a transformation here. Nice Lonicera here. This is one of our tenant houses, and we often do this sort of thing every spring. We have a clinic, another shot taken there in the middle of the summer there. So you can see how much easier it is to install a pool complex now compared to the old days. Here's another one that our students did. Looks rather stark here. This is right next to their dormitory. Overlap the cut. That's how it looked when it was finished. I think the stonework could have used a little slightly better masonry here, but we got that tidied up afterwards. Worked out really, really nice little feature. This is how the commercial firm installs pools at Longwood. It's not quite as efficient method, but it works out quite well. This is our East Conservatory, which is in the process of being demolished now, and this is the water garden here. But these guys do a pretty good job. We really had to ensure that they got the pool laid absolutely level, because of course water finds its own level, and if you don't have the pool laid level, you've got problems. So using a level is very, very important with pool installation. This just shows how the workmen are clipping the edges there, which works out quite satisfactorily. The foundation is very important. The pool should be installed on a good firm foundation. This would look familiar to all of you. In 1991, we worked with Roberta Burley Marks with something called the Cascade Garden, and Rolf Smith, who incidentally is coming to retire down in this area next month, he and I came down to Florida. We spent most of our time mainly in the Homestead area buying plants. I noticed last month you had a session on bromeliads. We were buying tropical plants, mainly bromeliads, but a lot of philodendrons and other related plants for the Roberta Burley Marks Cascade House, which also featured a lot of water. This was, you may know of this outfit. Here again, I don't get any commission, but Bullis bromeliads in Princeton do a really great job. Unfortunately, after this Andrew struck, and they lost the whole of this last structure, but I hear they've come back, and this is the quality of the plants that Bullis maintains. They're excellent bromeliads. We bought several truckloads for Longwood. Here's another shot. Wonderful Echmeas, Neurogelias, Nigulariums.
Where are they located?
Princeton, near Homestead. I don't know the area intimately, but it's there's probably, no doubt, someone in the audience who could give you exact location. Yeah.
It is wholesale only, right, Patrick?
I think so, yes, but you can find out where they ship to, you know.
Right.
This was Roberto's work here. Here's one of the fountains, and our plumbers did a remarkable job here with getting just this thin sheet of water down here. Remarkable job there. And here are some of the outstanding bromeliads: Neoregelia carolinei tricolor, Neoregelia concentrica, which are now a close-up of the funnel. We were discussing this last night with a number of organisms that can live down in these funnels: frogs, amphibians, even snakes. But it's a wonderful combination doing tropical plants with water. This was another good friend of ours, Margaret Mead, an amazing person who went to the Amazon on numerous occasions and did some beautiful artwork. I think you have this book. I'm not sure whether you have it in your library, but I see it in most horticultural libraries. It's a wonderful book, and here is Margaret out painting, an incredible person. She came to Longwood and I was very proud because I showed her our orchid collection back in the 60s, and she said that it was one of the finest that she'd seen in North America. Whiskey barrels, I'm quite fond of whiskey barrels, and it's rather funny because our local actory sells them, and I usually go down with a little wooden tapper to make sure that they will hold water, that they're not leaking. But if you have a whiskey barrel that does leak, you can easily line it. And our good friend Joe Tomasic from Denver did a little demonstration on this, and this is all that's really needed. Some black plastic, a pair of shears, some labels, a staple gun, and we can go through the practice here. Wash out the barrel thoroughly for a start, and stretch out the black PVC. Push it into the tub. Fill completely with water, or almost to the top. Then snip the excess plastic, staple, and you're in business. And believe it or not, you can get all these many pots in the next slide into this one whiskey barrel. It's hard to believe it, it can be done. And this is the result. We've got a little, I think that's an Albert Greenberg there, the Houtunia, Cypress autunifolius, some water, lettuce I think in there. These have been very popular, and the city of Philadelphia are now doing them. These are the different size. I'm not too keen on these prefabricated pools, but they can be a nice feature. I think the liner pools have just about replaced them now. And there's my patio at home there with different size containers, mixing ivy leaf pelargoniums with different size water containers there. We've got a Longwood water canna there, sweet flag. Makes a nice little feature there. My wife and I usually have lunch out there. Here's Bill with another one. You may have seen these. These are 3 barrels, one flowing to another with a return pump. And this is really a nice feature. This was a little show we put on for a charity scene in Wilmington one time, and we stood guard over that. Here's Bill's. The students are great scroungers at Longwood. They get a subsistence allowance, but they have to stretch it. And all of this material has been scrounged by Bill. The plastic, I think he got out of the waste bin that had been used, the driftwood and rocks he scrounged from the rocks. So there's a beautiful little water garden with perennials that he created, and they are evaluated on these. Another one here, one of our students, Glenn Eck, who's now in charge of horticulture at one of the colleges in Philadelphia. He got some limestone stone here, and I think he's got a little Shirley Bryan in here. Really a nice little feature there. So I always encourage the students to, to submit at least one garden, and preferably one water garden. Here's a good friend of ours who's a member of the society, Captain Jim. He's a retired ferry captain from the Delaware River, and he's created a really nice little feature here right in front of his residence, right in Andrew Wyeth country, in Chad's Ford there. Now the lotus, it's your down season for lotus here, and but these are fascinating plants. This is a plaque at the National Arboretum, which was, or rather the Kenilworth Gardens in Washington, D.C. Here's Bill Pearson, who some of you may have met back in the late 80s. He was a member of the society, another one of our students, and they're dividing the lotus. The tubers are much like sweet potato tubers. The tips are very delicate. You've got to be careful not to break them, but they're very prolific. This is a 36-inch concrete cylinder. You can see we're getting about half a bushel of tubers out of there. And they're sprouted in smaller pots and then planted back in the pools again. I do some of the dwarf ones, and talking to Bill yesterday, we mentioned Momar Batan. That's in one of my home pools at home. We've got a nice chromatella down here. Here's a close-up, I think, of Momar Batan. That does fairly well, and it will set seeds occasionally. We did mention something yesterday in our conversation. You've got to be careful with lotus because they can get away. They're probably better kept in containers. They tend to jump and spread, and they can really take over. That's Chuang Basu, a nice creamy white dwarf lotus. And coming up next are some of the bigger ones. It's a beautiful flower. If any of you are interested in dried flower arrangements, these fully developed receptacles make. They're almost like a baby's rattle or a shower head. The stamens fall off. And the Asian visitors just love these. You can see how high out of the water they stand. The seeds can actually be eaten. We sometimes lose a few, probably to Asian visitors who realize they can. And there's the white one, Album grandiflora, which I like especially. And these give height to a water garden and a different foliage effect. If you've ever dropped water on the leaves, it runs off like quicksilver. The leaf seems to be covered with a waxy-like cuticle. That's fascinating. Here's one of George Pring's outstanding hybrids named after his wife, Mrs. G.H. Pring. A really good white, and even though there have been some good whites introduced in the last few years, I still think this is one of the best. It's an outstanding lily. Mrs. G.H. Pring, and was probably growing here back in Mr. McKee's day, because some research was done into what lilies were growing here in the 30s. St. Louis, not to be confused with St. Louis Gold, which was his first successful yellow cultivar. Still a good lily, and we still grow it at Longwood. It seems to be a little lean in the trade. Delightful little lily here, collected in what is now Tanzania, was now Tanganyika, Nymphia colorata. And I've used this for hybridization purposes, and so has George Pring. It's a good little lily, and it's one of the tropicals that we'll do in a whiskey barrel. I think we saw one of these yesterday, Director T. Moore, named after the director of Missouri Botanical Gardens back in the 30s. And this one will do with a little less light than some of the others, and in a smaller container. Excuse me. Isabel Pring. Isabel Pring was Pring's daughter, who married Dr. Seibert, who's now living down near Sarasota. A nice creamy white. We were talking about viviparous lilies. These are the lilies that produced the little piggybacks yesterday afternoon. This variety is peach blow, and you can see nearly every leaf has a little piggyback. There's some debate as to the correct term to use for these, but piggyback's a good name for them. And all that one has to do is remove this portion of the leaf. We saw some yesterday actually, and these can be rooted in a 3 or a 4-inch pot, and in time will produce a parent lily just like the original there. So that's a nice little trend. Children seem to get a kick out of propagating these, the ones that, and a number of the tropicals are viviparous. And Brad McLean has introduced a new yellow variety which is viviparous. This is Bob Trickett. Bob Trickett was actually a London policeman who was very friendly with Pring, and his hobby was water lilies, and he was a very good contact for obtaining seed from all over the world. I met Bob back in the 60s, and Pring named that lily after Bob, which I think was nice. Aviator Pring, one of Pring's sons was a B-17 pilot, lost his life right at the end of World War I, so he named this lily after his son Bradford. Next one up is probably my favorite tropical water lily. And here's the wonderful thing with water lilies. Look at the wonderful reflections and leaf patterns that can be attained. This is St. Louis Gold, and you can see one of the pollinating insects, one of the small bees in there. That's probably a first day flower when the flower is filled with stigmatic fluid. Now that's one plant growing in I think a 28-inch container. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 flowers on that plant at the one time. And Bill yesterday gave me some figures for lilies that he'd recorded here for a number of flowers. So really tropical water lilies have a much longer flowering season than many of our other perennial garden plants. This is Nymphia Gigantea. It's the blue form. I really like the Giganteas. They're not too common in the trade at the moment, but I think they possibly will be. They have the stamens, as you notice here, are totally different from the other tropicals. They're big lilies. They grow in deep water in the state of Queensland. There's a blue form. There's a white form. Here's the white. And the white, incredibly enough, closes the first night and then stays open at night. And this is a day bloomer. We were mentioning this at breakfast this morning. We've lost this at Longwood at the moment, but I would love to get it back in cultivation again. So this is Nymphia Gigantea, variety Alba. And it's an outstanding lily. And here's the pink form, Neo Rosia, Several people in the society are working with the pink ones now. There's a newer cultivar called Andre Lou, which is quite nice. But these are outstanding lilies, and I think these would do well for you down here with your warmer climate. The night bloomers are fascinating. We discussed these yesterday, and because McKee doesn't open until 10 a.m., the visitors really can't appreciate these early in the morning. They open at dusk on a warm night for us, and probably for you here. They stay open all night, and for us they close around 11 to 12 noon the next day. Here's Missouri, which was featured in Ponte, the magazine, the last issue. Incidentally, this is an excellent magazine that covers all branches of water gardening, and they featured Missouri there in the last issue, which is one of my favorite night bloomers. It's obviously one of Pring's cultivars. It's a big lily, and as Paula mentioned in the article, it needs a lot of room and a lot of good soil mix to do well. But some of the best photographs I have of Missouri.
What's the name of this one?
I forgot. That's Mrs. G.C. Hitchcock. I beg your pardon. Yes, good for you. Thank you.
Okay.
And we were trying to identify some Hitchcocks yesterday. This one was also another one of my favorites. It's H.C. Harstick, another variety raised by James Gurney at Tower Grove Park. May have even been here in the old days, but not very many people carry it. But look at the wonderful bronze foliage. There's another cultivar called Red Flare, which you have here, which is fairly similar. Emily Grant Hutchins, which Bill tells me you've grown here. And I used Emily Grant Hutchins crossed with H.C. Harstick to produce Antares, which you have here, and you may recognize the photograph because Susan generously lent me this to show. There's a photograph of this in the administration building here. So we were rather pleased with that one. It's one of the few lilies that the advisory board thought worthy to name at Longwood. And there's Jennifer Rebecca, which you have here. Here's Jennifer Rebecca photographed at 10 a.m. in the morning. Here's Jennifer Rebecca photographed around 11 p.m. They give a wonderful show. There's a rather fascinating but amusing story concerning these. I spent a lot of time with Longwood's photographers out in the pools, and one morning I got home at 2 a.m. and I'm creeping up the stairs like the errant husband to try and get in without being heard, and inevitably one of the stairs creaked, and my wife calls out, "Where the devil have you been?" And I said, "I've been in the pools all night." And she said, "Yeah, that's a good one." She said, "I'm going to check with the nearest tavern to see what you do." Okay, could we have the next?
I have a question.
Yeah, fire away.
Is that a light that was shining?
Yeah, they're lights that we push into the water to eliminate the night bloomers. They used to be rather ugly. We called them mushroom lights, and then we got our electrician to go to some of these trade shows are marvelous. And he went to a trade show and came up with a much lighter fixture. It's lighter to handle and completely waterproof. So we push them into the soil and we move them around because the flowers come up at different angles. So we move them every 2 or 3 days. And that illuminates the whole pool complex is illuminated, but each night bloomer has a separate light, which the public really like. Because Longwood's open 3 nights a week, so in the summertime the public can go and enjoy the lilies. And as we'll see with the next slides, the Victorias are also open at night. Apparently one of your local growers, Kit Knotts, believes or has approved of cutting all the flowers off to get larger leaves. But if we did that, we wouldn't have anything for the visitors to see. And I'm not absolutely certain that that produces such a larger leaf. It's an interesting theory, and she may be correct, but the visitors love to see Victorias at night. And when you see the flowers in a few minutes, I think you'll understand why. Thank you. Now, yesterday we were discussing the difference between tropicals and hardies. This is a tropical water lily that's been lifted in October in Pennsylvania. You can see these walnut-sized tubers, but as Bill Cherry said to me yesterday, this doesn't always work out. You don't always find these tubers. And the better method of production is the one that I learned from Pring. He was probably one of the pioneers, where we have a separate propagation facility, and we propagate from the tubers, and then from tuber to tuber, which the next slide will show. Those are tropical water lily tubers. They're about the size and shape of a hickory nut. That's the growing point. And for us, they're planted, we store them in moist sand. We used to use mason jars, now we're using these freezer jars. And you can see that, you can even see here the little growing point, which is a good sign. We usually check them around Christmas to make sure none of them are decaying. And we can store them from October or November till March. What I did, I bought one of these. This was, you probably can recognize it. It's one of these things the florist used to store cut flower. And I took the glass doors off and put wooden doors on. And we can store Victoria seeds, we can store tubers, all sorts of things in this cooler. We keep them at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is how we plant them. We plant that this one is for display. You can see the tube has been planted about half the way down, and this one's been planted for propagation. We now use plastic pots. And if you've ever had to cut one of these clay pots in half with a hacksaw, it's quite a challenge. You can see there's a little roughage in the bottom there to prevent the contents disappearing. Then we top the layer with sand. Then they're placed in a tank at 70 degrees. The water's about 70 degrees Fahrenheit plus. After 2 or 3 weeks, these stoloniferous growths are produced, and they're pinched off carefully. Then they're potted up singly in another 4 or 3 inch pot. Fairly not a rich soil mix, as you don't want a great big lily. It's quite just a regular soil mix there. That's our typical Chester County silt loam there. Potted up singly, then topped off, sugared off with a little sand on top. That way no organic matter floats in the tank. There we are, sugaring the, and in. Then they're put back. There's Tim Jennings. He's our great water lily man at Longwood now. These are his propagation tanks. He's got hundreds of water lilies in there. He'll probably remove all these flowers so that the strength goes into the tuber. And those little plantlets which have just been propagated will produce a tuber much like the original one in about 6 to 8 weeks. And we have sent out a lot of tubers over the years. Pring initiated this, and we sort of took over from Missouri. So we've sent these little tubers all over the world to different gardens now. So it's only a tiny little house. There's one of the little vivaps. This is it's not a great display plant. It's Daubenii. It's rather a pallid blue, but it really does produce these. You can see it's actually flowering while attached to the parent plant. And all one would have to do is remove this portion of the leaf and then pot that up singly. I think you can also see one of our enemies here if you look carefully. I think when I didn't notice, I think when I photographed this there were a couple of water lily aphids which can be quite a problem. Are aphids a problem, Bill? For
Not
you?
here.
No, that's good.
They can be.
Yeah, they can be, and like all aphids, they have a tremendous reproductive rate, and we found out that washing them off, and we have mosquito fish in the pools, and they do a great job on them. I think even goldfish will do a pretty good job. We've gone away. Longwood has an IPM philosophy now, so we use the bare minimum of chemicals, and we like to use biological materials to combat. And the one that I potted up for display by about end of May would be a plant like this, maybe over 7 inches over the pot. That's probably St. Louis gold, so that's a good plant to go out into the pools. And they grow prodigiously. Sometimes we have visitors who've been to Longwood the previous year, and they've seen the water lilies at their peak, and they come in around beginning of June and they say, "Oh my goodness, what's happened? Have you had a disaster?" Because the water lilies are so small. And I just tell them, just be patient, come back in July, and we'll have a display here. But they begin to grow, if we've got them in a good soil mix, and then we also use fertilizer tablets later, they grow prodigiously. Now the hardy water lilies for you, I learnt yesterday from Bill, do not do that well. It's just so warm down here. We propagated a hardy yesterday. Here's one of our other students lifting a big, I think this is Comanche. This is 1 year's growth from a 4-inch pot. He's removing this. He's going to wash the excess soil off the roots. And then you end up with something like this. This looks very familiar to the one that we divided yesterday. There's the growing point. And there's the old leathery, rubbery tissue here. And then with a sharp knife or a pair of pruning shears, that's just showing the growing point here. With a sharp knife or a little saw or a machete, which I prefer to use now, you can make the cuts. And there's a nice division there. It has a nice growing point. You can sever the roots because they will branch again, and that would make up to a nice lily. That's Comanche, which is one of these pineapple types. Then you get the other types like Rosemary. It's an old cultivar, but I really like this lily. It was raised in Washington, D.C., I think, by Helen Fowler. You can see the little nods here, the little eyes. That's the part of the rootstock, and all one has to do is, you can see the divisions in the next slide. Every one of these, there's 1, 2, 3, will do, and even the little buttons, I think the next slide will show just a little button here. Yeah, even that will produce, it may not flower that particular year, but it will produce a good lily. So propagation of hardies is quite simple, and then the old rootstock is just discarded unless it's something rare. And then that's a scabucle. That's how they're looking, maybe 5 to 6 weeks. Already buds are flowering. You tip the one out of the pot. Next slide. You've got a nice, healthy root system. Even if that was bare rooted, that would take off. But now Maryland Aquatics have a method of producing stock plants. I guess it's a soilless mix, isn't it? And they're very successful. I was dubious when I first saw them, but I'm now convinced because those are good lilies. We've used some for demonstration, and they take off right away. They root from, what is the aggregate there? It's a
calcite clay, and
yeah.
it's a slow release fertilizer.
Yeah, and it really works. So, could we go back to just to keep my hand in, even though I was a boss in those years, we acquired a wonderful collection of water lilies from that national collection, and I brought them back. It was back in the days when they weren't so restrictive, and I was so concerned about them, I thought I better propagate them myself. So I'm back with my apron on there, and as you can see, most of them went through the process of crossing the Atlantic and taking off. And the next spring, one of the universities, well, it was Swarthmore, needed an instant water garden, and even though Don Bryan, I'm not sure whether Maryland Aquatics were down in Charleston at that time, but they couldn't get any hardy water lilies for the middle of May, early May, and we had some down here, an unheated plastic greenhouse, and we were able to put in an instant water garden for a medal awarding ceremony, so that was quite an achievement. Two gentlemen who had a lot to do with Longwood, Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe was a great designer, and our other gentleman there, oh my goodness, his name escapes me now, Sir Peter Shepherd. Sir Peter Shepherd designed our new pool complex. Sir Geoffrey designed the pool complex at Wisley, my old school, and I worked closely with Sir Peter. He was a very fine man. Sadly, he's no longer with us. But those two gentlemen have worked closely with Longwood. This was the pool complex, the new complex, 1988. And our director, he's a fine director. He can be somewhat forceful, and we went to him around this time when they were being built, and I said, you know, with a little luck, we should have a display this year. And he said, Patrick, there's no doubt about it, we're going to have a display. He didn't say my job was hanging on the line, but I got the definite impression that if we didn't have one, I'd be gone. So this was just in one season, we managed to demolish the old complex, which you may remember, and this is the new complex. And Sir Peter came and supervised, and he was very fastidious with this. This is Pennsylvania bluestone. Every piece had to be 2 inches thick, and I had to laugh at his analogy, but he said it used to be as thick as the fruitcake that he'd eaten as a boy in Britain. So that was but it was a really nice, and what it enabled us to do, he and I worked together. He was responsible most of, obviously, the design, but it was to have these planters at the back where we could grow Longwood's water cannas, cypress, and other plants, and also have a lot more floating plants in the pools, which I think it's improved it for the public, and it's improved it for us too. So this was really a nice change for Longwood. It also gives the public a little more room to walk around, and they don't have to walk on the grass, which by September usually used to be practically dead. Here's Sir Geoffrey's. If you ever go to Britain on a horticultural tour, go to the Royal Horticultural Society's gardens at Wisley in Surrey. This is Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe's design. These were greenhouses when I was there as a student in the 50s. And the proudest moment I think I had there was to see American varieties. That could be it. Texas Dawn, one of Ken Landon's outstanding varieties, doing very well under British conditions. And the lily that we divided yesterday is probably over here, the Temple Salop, which just seems to need, as Bill and I agreed, cooler water. I think we've got another shot of this pool complex. Yeah, that's the lab. That's where the students study. It's Sir Edward Luchin's design there. Beautiful building. But this has really improved the appearance of the entrance to Wisley. They've done a great job there. There's one of my favourite hardies. Apparently it doesn't do very well here. It's either listed as yellow pygmy or the correct name, Helvola. This is a wonderful lily for whiskey barrels up north. Very prolific. It's one of I think it's Tim Jennings' favourite lily, Helvola. There's a pretty good selection in the catalogues there. One of Marliak's, this Scabucle, still one of the outstanding red cultivars. Rose Airy, the one that I showed propagation, that's still one of my favourite pigs. It's not the greatest flowering lily, beautiful coloured leaves. I always have one of those in my 12 by 6 pool at home there. Easily propagated, very prolific. Atropurpurea, another one of Marliak's dark crimson cultivars. Guneri, very similar to the white one that we propagated yesterday afternoon. There seems to be a bad stock of this in the States. If you like this cultivar and you see it in a garden centre, make sure that the foliage is dark green, because a lot of Guneris I've seen seem to be virus. They've got flecked yellow leaves, and we dumped it at Longwood because of that reason. Here's a good friend of ours, Perry Slocum, with one of his red cultivars. He's produced a lot of good hardy water lilies. There's one that he named after Irene Heritage, a good friend of the Society and Perry. That's one of Kirk's drawn. Kirk's introduced some outstanding hardies. That one is named Mary. And one that does for you down here, Texas Dawn. It's not completely hardy for us. We may lose it this winter in the pools, but Ken and I have a very close relationship, and I can always get it replaced. That's an outstanding yellow hardy. Now the Victoria's interesting. This is a page from one of these old Victorian textbooks. It's a beautiful book. This is a seed pod. This is the underside of the leaf. This is a cut-through section of the flower. Here's a little seedling up here with the seed attached. There's a section through the stem. And it shows how spiny it is. I usually wear welder's gloves when I'm working with these plants. There's the stamens showing the graduation. And here's something that Susan will recognize. We did an awful thing. We railroaded Susan to sing on the stage here. This is the Opera House in Manaus. It's a magnificent building. This is our starting off point for Amazon Adventure. There's our vessel. Well, that's one of Mo Forte's vessels. This is in the flooded forest area. And the other thing that we have, Mo's son-in-law now has an aircraft. And here it is. And nothing shows more conspicuously than Victoria's from the air because of their big round leaves. So this is our morning catch. Those are piranhas, and they're good eating. Has anyone here eaten piranhas? They're decapitated, but they're good eating. You just have to be careful working with them when they're still active. This is the search for, this is Dr. Mead. He was a geologist who came along with us, and we spotted this one. This was low water season, and we spotted these Victorias, and I'd read some of Dorothy L. Sayers' mystery novels where people got stuck in quicksands, and that's about as near as I've ever got to that. But Dr. Mead very bravely went in first to check the pH of the water, and then I think he went on a few more yards. Yeah, there he is. his pH meter. And I followed him in, and for a moment there I just wasn't budging, and then I could move my big toe and then the rest of my toes, and then I started to move a little better, and then we worked our way in a little further, and there they were. Low water but some beautiful flowers, and then the rest of the gang came in. I think we've got a shot here of Emma Fox working with us. Yeah, there's Emma, there's myself, and we managed to get some really good pods. We had to get all the paperwork done. It's getting more and more difficult to get plants out of Brazil now. You have to go through the channels. There's a couple of the other people on board. That was the last expedition that we went on where we were able to collect seeds. And I think the next shot shows Mo. This is amazing. Susan was mentioning that she couldn't get to the pink stage. That's a first night Victoria flower. There's a second night. It's female on the first night, receptive to pollen. And on the second night, it sheds pollen, and it's pollinated by a scarab beetle, which gains entrance on the first night. And then when the flower closes, the beetles are trapped inside, and the beetles feed on the starchy staminodes in the middle. Then on the second night, they're released, and as they escape the flower, their bodies are just covered with the pollen. It's just like talc. So it's a wonderful demonstration of cross-pollination. This was a really good strain. There are the seed pods. They're about the size of a grapefruit, but as you can see, they're very spiny. These are some that I've pollinated with. Obviously, you have to attach a label to each pollination. You can see where all the floral parts are rotted off. In fact, I cut them off with a sharp knife. And this was the receptive surface where the pollen grains germinated and then grew down and fertilized the ovules. And here are some of this is Missouri Botanical Garden, back before the angel statues were added. I think I preferred it the way it was in a way, but these are, along with Victoria hybrids growing in front of the famous Clinotron. This is 160 feet in diameter, and it's the first Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome that was completed in the United States. And Longwood supplied a lot of plants for this house. We could still get plants out of Cuba in those days. There's another one of my old alma maters, the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. That's a Longwood hybrid in the Princess of Wales Conservatory. And the next year they managed to, I think Perry Slocum has doubted this. He said he's grown one 9 feet in diameter. But the one at Kew, I think, was 8 feet 7 inches, and it's been entered into the Guinness Book of Records as the largest Victoria leaf recorded. And you can see how well they fill up the pools at Longwood here. 1, 2, 3, and as is mentioned in this month's Pond Keeper, we've got Antares, Missouri, and I guess that's not James Gurney. We must have had another dark night. It's probably Jennifer Rebecca. But we usually have 3 night bloomers and 3 Victorias in the centre pool, a lotus in the centre, and a plant that you're probably not too fond of down here, the water hyacinth, which is no problem for us. It's a fairly good cleansing plant. This is Rich Thatcher's retail pond. He's doing a great job in another one of our Longwood students. He's in New Orleans. He's done some nice hybridization work, and he's had a nice little business down there for a number of years. I think he deals mainly in tropicals. Here's Don Bryan up at Lake City, and this is when we were working with White Flower Farm. And here's one of his soil mixes there. I think he gets soil from Winter Garden, mixes it with cow manure, and then tops it off with sand. But Don grows good lilies. When I was working with him with White Flower Farm, we were able to get lilies in flower very early in the year. And I've had bare-rooted lilies come in from him, and 10 days later they've been in flower. This is one of the ponds near his establishment, where there's great expanses of our native water lily, Nymphea odorata. We noticed some odoratas on the way from the airport on Thursday rather. There's one of his greenhouses. I think he's totally wholesale now, but he cranks out some pretty good lilies. McLean's in Fort Lauderdale do a good job too. There's his outdoor pools, and sensibly he has just one cultivar in each pool. That way they don't get mixed up. I think this was the year we had the symposium there, and they had a great big barbecue for everybody, which we really enjoyed. The other thing that I really enjoy about Don, if any of you have ever been on the Swanee River, it's a really clean river, and we had a whole day trip almost to the Gulf of Mexico, and we saw just acres of Nymphaea mexicana. This is Perry Slocum's or Peter Slocum's establishment in Winter Haven. I hear on the grapevine that it may be up for sale. This photograph, believe it or not, was taken in January, and they're a Longwood hybrid Victorias, looking very good. We were mentioning this at breakfast this morning. So Perry was able to overwinter water lilies in Winter Haven, Florida, Victorias. This is what a retail outfit should look like. This is stately water gardens with everything neatly labeled, carefully stacked, clean and tidy. And this is the Chelsea Flower Show, and this was an exhibit of Longwood water cannas which received a gold medal from the Royal Horticultural Society. This was Stately Water Gardens exhibit, and I was sort of pleased to see our cannas raised by Dr. Armstrong awarded a gold medal. This is Deb and Susan's establishment out in Lawrence, Kansas. They're very strong members of the society and very good water lily growers and experts. This is how a garden could be transformed. In the mid-60s, Skip March, who some of you may have met, got in touch with me and said, Patrick, we put in fact, someone was talking about a trailer yesterday. What preceded this at the National Arboretum was a trailer. This was the new information center and offices, but they didn't have any water plants. And Skip got in touch with me. He said, could you draw me up some plans, Patrick, and send me some plants, and we'll try and transform this rather stark water area. And this is how it turned out, really very nicely. The only problem was the water was a little shallow, and they were given a collection of koi, I think by the Japanese government, which were a little bit destructive on some of the water plants. And I think they've had some leaks since, but this I thought was a big improvement, having the plants in there. So that's the National Arboretum of Washington, D.C. Dr. Armstrong, our geneticist, raised a crop of water cannas by crossing a rather plain Brazilian water canna with garden cannas. This one is Canna Ra, one of my small home pools. That's how we use them at Longwood, in those big planters at the back, and you see that gives some height to the pools, and then we can have floating plants in the front here, water lettuce, some of the scurpus. There's another close-up there showing these. Some people refer to these as bogs. They're not really true bogs because they're mainly composed of marginal plants. Nice lotus on the right here. It makes a nice background for the pools, and it also provides a nice environment for the gambusia fish. And I think it also inevitably must help with filtration of the water, because the plants will be taking up excess phosphorus, nitrogen in the water, nitrates especially, and I think that helps to keep our water clean. There's another shot. There's Canna Ra, Sweet Flag, the Bowles Golden, Carex, Pickleweed, Pontideria cordata. So we're very grateful to Sir Peter for his updated design. This is a plant, this is an enigma. We've almost lost this once or twice. Several people have claimed that they introduced this into the United States. I still maintain that we introduced it from Roberta Burley Marx, but it seems to have its ups and downs. There's a gentleman nearby who maintains that he can carry it over in flats as a sort of a sub-aquatic plant. Randy Hefner, I think his name is, and that there may be some truth in that. And we've had to reintroduce it, but it's a fascinating plant. It's got a wonderful leaf pattern. I made the mistake when I first put it in the pools of having it a little near the edge. And the next day when I went down, I saw that I was about a dozen down.
Patrick, Bill tells me we've got it right outside.
Oh, we have? Good. I'm glad it's doing well for you. Good.
The heads go away during the winter months, but
Yeah.
it comes back.
Yeah. But it's a fascinating plant. The visitors love it. I think the leaf patterns are wonderful.
We get plates in the middle of
Yeah.
summer that are 7 to 8 inches across.
Good. There's the pools at the Fairchild Tropical Garden, which I think is a nice little feature there. And the new director there is the son of a man that I graduated with, So I'd be interested to get in touch with him down there. And they've done a remarkable job there since Andrew struck. I couldn't believe how they're writing palms and cycads. This is, if you're in New York State, this is another interesting garden. This is the Pepsico Headquarters near Tarrytown. All their lilies, I think, come from, what was William Trickle and Sons. It's now Waterford Gardens. And they're all tropicals, and they do a very nice job here. Manicured lawns. It's sort of like a Dutch or Italian style garden, rectangular pools, but very nice feature. And the whole concept of this is it's where the employees can go and have lunch or enjoy it in the evening there. It's a beautiful garden, the Pepsico Headquarters. Now, that's Evelyn Randhead, which we liked, and the next few slides are some of the newer cultivars which should be on the market soon. We've got Mahogany Rose. This is the darkest lily I think I've seen. This is one of Rich Satcher's. It's really heavily mottled or marbled or marmorated. Then we've got Serendipity, which I really like. I think we have one of his lilies in the garden here. There is Star of Zanzibar. That's one of yours, isn't it? No, maybe it's Rich's. Is it okay?
Rich.
Yeah.
Rich Satcher.
Rich Satcher, yeah, Rich Satcher. And last, what are they going to call this now?
Carla's Sunshine.
Okay, so Carla's Sunshine. This is a new variety introduced by Brad and Bruce McLean, which they say is viviparous. And I think the next slide is the last slide, shows a close-up. Looks like an outstanding new yellow cultivar. I did hear from Ken Landon that it didn't seem to grow high out of the water. It was rather like Baghdad, but that isn't the greatest deficiency in the lily. I like the colour of it, and I like the shape of the petals. And if it will produce piggybacks, that'll be great for getting numbers into the trade. Okay, well that completes our story on water lilies. Oh, okay, yes, we have some handouts that I think may be of use to you. Any questions on?
I have just a little small water garden at home, and it's a basin. But anyway, I found a little miniature last summer, and it did very well with their babies. But what I did in the winter, I'm from Connecticut, and I took it inside, and I put heat moss around the top, put it in a plastic bag, tied the top, and we have like a crawl space, and put it inside our house. And it's on a wall that's, where we
In
have
a wall.
heat.
Did it come through the winter?
I don't know, I haven't been home.
Okay. Well, I hope it does for you. Tim Jennings, who you saw, has overwintered Panama Pacific on his porch in Annapolis, Maryland. Now, whether he's been able to do it this year, we've had a severe, if you're from Connecticut, you know what the weather's been like. You've had some incredibly low temperatures.
Yes, that's
So
what
I don't
I'm
know.
kind of worried about.
Yeah. What you can do, I think that far north is maybe, if you had a light fixture in the basement, you could possibly, Dorman will go through the winter as far north as we are in a tub in the basement, but
Oh, that's right, I put the pot in something.
well, that might help to keep, because if it gets desiccated, it probably will not come through, but I hope it does come through for you anyway.
Yeah, but
Yes,
Are you, I'm not from here, I'm from Canada, are you implying that hardy water lilies here don't do very well?
well, you can talk to the expert here, Bill. The reds take a beating. Now, there are some, if you trace their ancestry back and if they have any Nymphia mexicana in their blood, as a common expression, they may do possibly better. Texas Dawn is a cross between Mexicana and Pink Scarlet. But some of Marliotte's European varieties just don't do that well, and we were discussing this. The reds take a beating, don't they, Phil? The sunlight. Yeah. So the red ones that I showed you seem to really take a beating, but
I grow about 25 varieties of hardy lilies here, but our season for selling them is done about June, about mid-June.
Yeah.
Down here they succumb to fungus. They
Yeah.
require a lot of treatment
Right.
because they get fungal spotting on the leaves. So
Probably
it
Sarcasmus or
becomes a
something
point.
similar, yeah.
But mine are already showing leaves
Oh,
and
yeah.
they'll be blooming within a month.
Well, I've been to Jarrettsville in March. I was there with Rich once. He said, nothing's showing. I said, look down here. It was maybe April, and the hardies were just popping, you know. It was the
Right.
year we lost a lot of grass there.
Well, that's why they opened us down
Yeah.
here, because we hit the front of the season, and we're pretty much done with
Yeah.
parties by 1st of June. I
Yeah.
still sell a few, but they require so much upkeep
Yeah.
beyond June that it's
I think
not.
the tropicals are the way to go this far south, and they have such a longer flowering season. I mean, even for us, we plant out at Memorial Day, and even with unheated pools, I've had Shirley Bryan in flower on October the 20th in an unheated pool.
5X will go year round.
Yeah, it's amazing. So it's a long season. Yes.
Well, the tropicals for us in Toronto, Canada, will bloom until light frost. In fact, Albert Greenberg, it will be still blooming with the ice on the phone.
Yeah. We've seen that at long when we haven't heated the water, you know, so
They
it's a
take
long...
longer to get started.
Yeah.
Once they start blooming, they
I think they're much hardier than the earlier writers wrote about, you know. I think they're especially when they've gone through a summer, you know, ups and downs, because I guess you've got a cool temperature forecast for tonight, haven't you? Is that the Oh, that's not as cool as That'll feel balmy when I get back to Pennsylvania. Any other questions on water gardening or water lilies? Yes.
Could you talk about soil mixes? 'Cause
Oh,
we've
yes,
been
certainly,
talking
yeah.
about that.
This is a real controversial thing because we were discussing this yesterday. We're fortunate enough in Pennsylvania to have good loam soils, so we can strip areas. We can grow green crops. We can grow clovers, which are of course legumes. And P.S. was very smart. When he purchased Longwood, there were 300 acres open to the public, but he bought all the surrounding farms. So we can use some of this land to produce soil for the greenhouse, which you can well see 4 acres of greenhouses take a lot of soil. So our soil is called a Chenery Silt Loam, and the great thing with loam is that it contains a certain amount of clay, which I think is it's not vital, but it does make a big difference because clay has something that agronomists call cation exchange properties. So clay can actually hold some of these cations that are needed, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, that are needed for nutrition. Now with the soils you've got down here, it's predominantly a sandy mix, isn't it, Bill? So it doesn't contain the nutrients that we have up north, so you've probably got to feed a little more frequently. And then the problem is, if the fertilizer's not being taken up completely by the plant, you may be affecting the water there and maybe encouraging algae. Don Bryan does very well up in Lake City. He buys soil in from further south and then mixes it and composts it himself. It's a lighter mix than what we use. I wouldn't like to say that that ours is any better than his, because he can grow as good lilies as we can. The only other thing now, which Maryland Aquatics is doing with this, it's a calcined clay, isn't it, mix? I mean, they're producing...
It'd be to spin the tuber in
Yeah.
and spun polyester.
So I think it's revolutionized propagation, even though we're still using a soil mix. I mean, those plants
We're
take off...
experimenting right now with,
Yeah.
with a human hair foam that's made from human hair that is grown in the...
Yeah, I think for propagation, you know, and if you buy plants raised in that, they'll take off. I mean, I wasn't dubious, I was interested, but and they're lighter to pack, they're lighter to ship. They probably don't suffer as much
You don't
damage.
tear up the root ball when you ship, it's all one
No,
package.
and a water lily is incredible with regeneration. Even when they're root prune, if they're in healthy condition, they'll take off. So, you know, to answer your question with soil and nutrition, I think we've still got, you know, we can still do some research there. But nutrition is very important for water lilies. They're what an agronomist would call a good indicator plant. If there's a nitrogen deficiency, they'll show it. If there's a phosphorus deficiency, they'll show it. If there's a potassium deficiency, they'll show it. And if there's a general deficiency of nutrients, the leaves will be smaller, the flowers will be smaller. They'll just show hunger signs. And they really respond to good nutrition. So the mix, the media that you use for them is important. But the longer I stay in this game, the less dogmatic I become, because no sooner do you say something can't be done someone at the back of the class raises their hand and tells me that they've done it. So, yes.
What are the signs of phosphorus and potassium deficiency?
Potassium deficiency is often a marginal leaf scorch. The outside of the leaf has a sort of like a yellowish white ring. Usually with potassium, it's general lack of vigor there. Nitrogen's fairly distinctive because the leaves look chlorotic. They're just pale, you know, they just don't have that nice dark lustrous green. And the incredible thing is, when we did some trials with different fertilizers and different mixes, sometimes within 48 hours of applying a fertilizer, the lily will, it's incredibly how quick a nymphia will take up nutrients. There's a very good book written by Diane Wolstead, isn't it, on nutrition, on the ecology of an aquarium. And there's some really good chapters in there on nutrition. She must have done some experimental work in aquariums on a smaller scale. But the other thing to be wary of is toxicity from heavy metals and that sort of thing. Well, if you, what I would advise, if you're going in for water lily culture in a big way, get the soil analysed at a state university and find out exactly what it contains. Find out what the NPK is, and find out what the pH is. Find out what trace elements are in the soil. Because we've had some samples where we've been composting maybe undesirable material, and we've come up with some fairly high readings, and we've just dumped it. So I think most your state universities do that service here, don't they? With soil. And I think it's a good form of insurance to get the soil tested, especially if it's on a big scale.
We borrow soil and have it at 5.5 pH.
Do you? That sounds pretty good. Yeah. Yes.
How much sun does a water lily need to flower?
They'll take about, well, I've just got through mentioning that the bright sunlight scorches the red ones, but in my opinion, they'll take all the sun they can get. If we'd have had our choice, that water lily complex at Longwood would have been on the south side of the conservatory rather than on the north. I think once they get acclimatized to the sunlight, I think they'll take all the light they can get. And then if you've got a complex and the sun's traversing, you know, they're not going to get full sun for the whole day there. On the other end of the stick, there are some cultivars, you can see that from my deck, that will do with less than 8 hours sun. They seem to, Director Timur seems to do fairly well, Panama Pacific. St. Louis Gold, not so well. It's surprising how they do vary. Sometimes I see rather extravagant claims made for lilies that would do with maybe 2 or 3, and I'm a little skeptical, because the more sun they can get, I think the better.
I have one up north and it never flowers.
Never
There's lovely
flowers.
little marble leaves, but it only gets 4 to 5 hours of sun. I guess that's
Never flowers at all.
Never had it for 2 seasons.
Maybe not the lack of sunlight, might be another reason perhaps. Has mottled leaves then, so it's a marmorator. Maybe it's an Evelyn Randig or something like that. That is one fascinating thing with water lilies. There are a number of them that have these mottled leaves, and our more outstanding students can usually recognize most of the cultivars by the leaves alone. You know, they're worth growing for the foliage there.
The leaves are beautiful.
They are,
So
yes.
it's not a flower.
Any other questions?
Just one more. Have you ever discovered any way to overwinter water hyacinths up north?
Yeah, this was an incredible, last winter I took water cannons down into the basement in cold water. I had small water hyacinths at the base, and even water lettuce. I couldn't believe it when I pulled out the canners on poor light in my basement. We had one light on for the cat down there, and just one small bulb. They came through. I couldn't believe it, because we failed with them sometimes in the greenhouses. What we usually do is Richard.
We're in the lettuce and hyacinth primarily.
If we have a disaster, I guess he ships them up, doesn't he?
And he sends me a piece of paper. And
he's got another strain of water lettuce now, which is a more compact one, which is really nice.
The rosette or the variegator?
No, it's the rosette. Is that what you call it? I've never seen it before, 2 or 3 years ago. It's more compact.
Yeah, we had some that actually got to be about that big last year, but that's about max.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're very organized.
They look like
a little displays.
They look like a little cabbage or a little Savoy cabbage. They're really nice for tub gardens. They're ideal. Did he find that by accident or what?
They're illegal in Florida.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the problem, of course.
Hyacinth and lettuce illegal in Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess up in the St. John's River they've spent a lot of money, haven't they, trying to keep the waterway clear. But they're wonderful cleansing plants. I mean, they'll take excess nutrients out of the water. The gambusias love them. They sort of congregate in those fibrous roots there. And they're great for the school groups because we usually cut one open and it's like K-pop, you know, it's spongy. But I guess they have been a real bane in Florida.
We've actually got a guy here who's a shrimp farmer, and he uses an entire greenhouse with a pond in it full of water hyacinths and water lettuce to clean the nitrites out of the water for the shrimp and reuses his water. He's able to reuse the water.
In Westchester, Pennsylvania, they used it for one summer for the sewage effluent, and it worked, but they didn't build a plastic greenhouse, so they only got one season out of it. The other thing we've done, we've given bushels to turkey farmers in Lancaster County because they've got into trouble because those lagoons have been emptied into Chesapeake Bay. So they can only use it for one season in Pennsylvania, so we've given them bushels and they plant them in these lagoons where I guess the effluent from the turkey houses go, and the water hyacinths, man, they're like Kelly's lotus that I guess she fed on the chicken manure that year.
Well, we use them to filter all the water for our ponds. All our raceways are built to flood into hyacinth
and it works. I mean,
and then run back into each other. So.
And it really works. Any other questions? Well, good luck in all your ventures, and if you haven't tried water gardening, do so. It's a fascinating hobby, and you get a great deal of satisfaction and delight from it. And thank you, Bill, for yesterday afternoon. That was interesting comparing notes with you. Bill's got some prize Victorias back in his aquarium tank. I really commended him. So you should have some good Victorias here this summer, which will be outstanding.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.